Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I welcome you to my talk, Why Bad Code Quality is Not Only Your Fault. So first of all, if you already have listened to a lot of talks today, you know the drill. Um, Scan the code to Slido, and maybe if you still have it open and watch the talk before in another room, make sure that you are in the cinema black box. Because I will only see the questions, of course, from the cinema black box. And also I encourage to vote up questions if you see a question that someone else asked and you find important, so I can prioritize the questions that were asked more. So about me, my name is Annelore Ecker, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and about 8 years of programming experience. And I'm a software engineer at Open Value Switzerland since May 2024. So Open Value is like a Java consultancy company, or they also make other things, but mostly Java. I think the closest office to here would be Cologne, but I'm from Switzerland, so I am from the Zurich office. And I also quickly wanted just to say that I want to encourage you at the conference also to talk to other people or also to the people at the booth, because actually I got my job through JCon, so just to let you know. So, do you sometimes wonder why some of the code you see in your day-to-day life has a low code quality, but you cannot really put your finger on it? Today I want to analyze some aspects that could be the reason for that. First of all, it is also important for me to highlight, even though it says fault in my title, I don't want to blame anyone. I mean, blaming is never a good idea and it just leads to nothing. So I only want to analyze situations and find issues and potential ways to improve the situation. And also, I want to quickly define code quality in this specific context. When I talk about code quality, I mean code that is easy to understand, easy to change, and less likely to break unexpectedly. So I had the idea for this talk when I was approached by a business analyst, because he had found some business logic that was unnecessarily complicated. And we then also realized that it translated a lot into the code. So actually, in preparation for another feature, we wanted to rework the rule set, because we knew it had grown historically and there was a lot of duplication. And during this, the business analyst discovered even more business logic that could be simplified. So there was also an earlier story where we already had improved the business logic, and there were also still things that rules that became obsolete, but we never realized that they were no longer necessary. So this also led to more complexity. And also, like, the whole business logic was very complex in this part of the applications, and there were quite a few edge cases that led to bugs. So I cannot show you the exact example because it is an example of my customer, but I created another example that should hopefully still show the underlying issues. So in my example, we have postmen that deliver letters along a specified route using a motorcycle. So this line is like the route that the motorcycle takes. The boss, they would like to monitor the whereabouts of his employees, and he can follow this on a web application. And there's also an app where other postmen always can see where are their colleagues. So they have like a different view that shows them, for example, how many kilometers away are their colleagues. So Every time when a postman starts or stops, an update is sent to the applications. So these upwards arrows, they represent updates that are sent to like a central system that then is displayed in the web application and in the mobile applications. And always the same arrows with the same colors also represent the exact same content. As you can see, this leads to many unnecessary updates, because in most cases there's no difference when the postman stops and when he leaves again, so it's the same information that is sent twice. But at the beginning of the route there is no stopping event, and at the end of the route there is no start event. And therefore it was actually decided to make it more easy to always have a start and a stop event, so it covers all the cases. So simplifying this was like one of the core tasks for the stories. There were a lot of rules duplicated, and it was then decided that we actually just say it should fire when there is a stopping event, but when there is no stopping event, it also checks if there's a starting event. Moreover, if there's a stop where the postman does not stop, it still unnecessarily sent out an update, just having the same information than before. But yes, this also doesn't help anything because it's still the same update than before. So this is a rule that also could be removed. So the original example is far more complex, but I hope that I was able to get my point across, that the complex business logic then also is depicted in the code, which in turn makes the code very complex. So if we were not already reworking the rule set, because we knew that we had to change a lot of things because of another feature we wanted to do later, we would not even have found this issue. But I also want to highlight that even though there were issues, this is actually a positive example because the business analyst found the issues. And after applying the insights, we had cleaner, more maintainable code. And there were less bugs. And we also drastically reduced the number of events that were sent out. So I would like to analyze the underlying issues, why this code could have gotten so bad in the first place. So obviously there was unnecessary duplication, and consolidating classes that were almost identical already had a huge impact on the complexity and the code quality. Originally, it was decided to do this purposefully, and because the idea was it should be easier, but actually in the long run, I am not sure if this really was the case or if it just made it more difficult. Because if you have duplication, you always have to make sure that if you change something, it also has to be adapted in the duplicated code as well. And there were a few places where we saw that this really was an issue, that the duplications weren't exactly the same, or sometimes they just forgot about one rule because it's just too much, so you don't see that it is missing. Another issue is the complexity. And unfortunately, in my example, I maybe was not able to show it in all detail, but the rule set is insanely complex. So there's a huge list of rules, and it is difficult to remember which rules do what and which rule set override another rule set and so on. So the duplication and the complexity could both stem from the issue that sometimes it is difficult to still see the big picture in a big system. And I think for developers this might sometimes even be a bigger issue, because we often lose ourselves in the detail of the part we are implementing at the moment. In this example, these three things work together, and I think it is like a vicious cycle. So, but by simplifying the code and removing unnecessary code, the code became easier to maintain, and it also led to better code quality. So an important topic that I want to look at in regards of maybe having also bad code quality is actually miscommunication and misunderstandings. Usually people from business and software developers do not speak the same language, I would say. And I think you could even say that there's like an independence mismatch. And I think that the goal is to find out how we can improve the communication, but this is easier said than done. I think both sides should proactively approach each other, and I think an issue is that usually both sides make assumptions. When you are aware of it, then you can also start to work on it. And when I talk about assumptions, this could be different things. It could be assumptions about, how does the system work, or like the system that I do not know. Like if I am from the business, I don't understand how the system works. But it could be also the other way around, that if I'm a developer, I make assumptions about some things in the business logic. But there could be also assumptions that you think as a developer, another developer knows something, but he doesn't know it. So in general, I think you should try to realize when you have assumptions, and then you should try to ask more questions just to make sure that you can in the end do your decisions based on what the other person told you and not based on the assumptions. And also from the other side, it's important that you try to give as much information as possible. So this also should reduce the risk of having a lot of assumptions. So there is also a very important quote that I find it shows it very well. It's from Jackie Reed, Mastering Visual Communication. I will mention this video later again because it is a very good video. So she also said, what is deployed to production is your developer's misunderstanding. And I think this is exactly what is the issue when there's miscommunication. In order to improve the communication between developers and the business, there are different possibilities. For example, Open Value also offers some courses, namely IT development for non-IT people, DevOps for managers, effective communication for software developers. And just a disclaimer, I did not create this talk just to promote these courses. It was really during my preparation for this talk, I realized, there are some existing courses, so I just wanted to let you know maybe they are something for you. And as you see, this is a link. So at the end of my talk, you can scan a QR code where you get all the slides, and then you can also click on all the links that are on the slides. And I think another great way to bring developers and the business together is if the developers can see how their application is used. I luckily had the opportunity already at 2 employers where I was able to accompany the people that use the application I am developing in their day-to-day life, just to see how they are using it, and to better understand their workflow and maybe also see their pain points. So I think in general, if developers do not understand the requirements correctly, This is also reflected in the code quality, and maybe it even doesn't do what it should do. But I think there's often also the case that it somehow does what it should be doing, but in a too complicated way, and then later on still bugs sneak in very easily. I think sometimes there could also be misunderstanding between developers. And I often experience that people explain something to me, and then I have to ask again to be sure what they actually meant, because they didn't maybe use exactly the same words I would use to explain the same. I think in general it is good when people try to stick to the official terms, but I think this also does not always work. I mean, in this example on the picture, you see talking about interface can be a user interface or a Java interface. And yeah, so it can create confusion quite quickly. Yeah, but I think, it's important to stick to the terms if you know them. I know sometimes you don't know the business term or you just forgot it, but at least the ones that you are aware of, it can already help a lot to have less confusion. Actually, what I very often experienced is that commit and push is like used interchangeably. I think usually it isn't an issue because out of the context it is clear what is meant, but it just came to my mind because I really experienced it often that people said, oh, I will commit that, but actually they meant push it because in the context it was clear that they wanted to make sure that I have the code. So another great way to mitigate misunderstandings is using diagrams. I think in general complex topics can usually be better understood with a diagram, and I think it often makes also sense to draw a diagram therefore. And I really like to draw a sketch or a diagram when I have something that is more complex. I personally like just to do it with pen and paper, but feel free to use whatever is good for you, a tablet, a program, or whatever. But I think it really helps because through the sketch, I can show other people what I have understood and also maybe show where in the whole system my issues are. And usually they understand the whole context much better and can better help me. And also if I accidentally understood something wrong, they see it better on the diagram and then they can point it out to me. So it helps in the communication. And sometimes when I'm working at home, I said sometimes I usually do it on paper, but I then just take a picture and send it to them, so it still works. And I also have experienced that in a Zoom call we use the drawing tool to explain something. This is maybe not perfect because you sometimes have to draw with the mouse and it's not the best, but still it could maybe still help to draw it a bit instead of only using words to describe something that is very complex. Also, I think sometimes when you need to create a diagram in order to understand something, I think it could also indicate that this diagram is missing in your documentation. And if it is a too specific diagram that was created for a very specific use case, I still think it would maybe also make sense to add it to the documentation. I would just make sure to clearly indicate that this diagram is specifically for a specific use case, so no one is confused why only certain parts are in this diagram and some things have been left out. But I think it could still be helpful, at least if this person once also has to work on the same part. On the topic of adding things to your documentation, if you are a bit confused, maybe also how you could do it the best, There's also a video I can recommend from Jackie Reed. It's called Knowledge Management for the Technically Inclined. I put it in the further resources of my slides, so if you get the slides, you can look at it. But this is beyond the scope, but I just wanted to mention it. So I think overall diagrams can help with the understanding of concepts. And I think this could be existing diagrams, but also personal sketches. So I think that's also a reason why you sometimes no longer see the big pictures, because the existing diagrams are not enough, and you just have so large code bases or too large teams, so you do not really know anymore what is existing and what not. I think most teams have a diagram that shows the big picture, but maybe this is not enough in every case. So it definitely needs multiple diagrams. So maybe like something that is like an intermediate big picture or so. And I think it could be any type of diagram, and I think with diagrams in general, I think it's important that you use the diagram that helps you to understand the concept that you want to understand. And I think it is also to some degree okay to maybe deviate a bit from the rules. I mean, I realized multiple times that people do mostly not follow UML to a T because they do not know all the details and it is just too much. I think it's just important to make sure that everyone in the team knows how the diagram should be understood, and therefore it's very important to also use legends, especially if you use elements that are not very clear. Sometimes it makes even sense to put some specific UML details in the legend, because if it is not one symbol from UML that everyone knows, it's just helpful that it is in the legend again, so they don't have to look it up every time. So I already once mentioned Jackie Reed, or multiple times actually. So I can highly recommend her talk, Mastering Visual Communication for Software Development, from regarding diagrams. And so I also have the link here to the whole tag so that you can access when you get my slides. But there are a few points that I wanted to point out because it's very important, I think. So different audiences need different diagrams. So make sure that you also have diagrams that are more suitable for the business side, but also for the development side, and think about what they need, and maybe rather think about if you should create multiple diagrams instead of only one where you combine everything. I also think that it's very important to consider color blindness. I also at least once have worked with someone that was colorblind, and as you probably know, color blindness is most prevalent in men, and I think you are all aware that we are in a men focused or there are more men in IT, so the chance is high that someone in your team is colorblind. So I think it just makes sense to test for that. There are a lot of different tools you can use, but the easiest is actually to just check how it looks in grayscale. If you can differentiate the colors in grayscale, it should usually be okay. And also, usually high-level diagrams stay up to date for the longest. So at least high-level diagrams, it makes sense to create them because you do not have to change them very often. But diagrams that are very, very detailed, of course, it sometimes does not make sense anymore to always create them, especially if you know that they could change. The implementation could change very soon. So I tried to do a very simplified high-level diagram. I mean, my diagram is also fictitious, so I just imagine something. But yeah, when I would have this big picture, I think it would also make sense to make like an intermediate big picture, and I think here in this simple example it makes sense to like take the same diagram that I also used to explain the example. But yeah, in general it makes sense to break down the things into different levels just to explain it better. Another reason why it's difficult to have the overview of the project is that there are a lot of knowledge silos. So there are big projects and it is almost impossible for one person to know enough about the entire project. Mostly developers work like on one particular part and they know a lot about this, or maybe they know a few things about different parts, but they usually do not know everything about the entire application. And also often it is easier to split up tasks or responsibilities so you can ignore everything else and only do your work. But I think that's not really possible and not sustainable, because I'd say the link between different responsibilities or modules is actually one of the most difficult aspects while creating an application. And another frequent issue is that knowledge is not shared enough. So when you then mainly work on one particular part, it is not that astonishing that you cannot see the big picture and you only know the scope that you are working in. I think this behavior is dangerous because as soon as someone is sick, on holidays, leaves the company or so on, then you have other problems. And this is also beyond the scope of my talk, but it's just a reality that we have to live with. So one possibility to collaborate more could also be to do more pair programming. Or there are also bite-sized architecture sessions. I linked them here because I also only heard about them recently. The idea is there that first everyone tries to create the diagram, and then you talk together and see what didn't you understand and so on. I think it's a bit like a brainstorming session, but specifically for architecture. So I think it is worth checking out if it sounds interesting to you. And also, in order to better distribute the knowledge and to prevent losing knowledge, it's important to improve the documentation. I mean, people often forget things, so even for people that were involved when specifying or implementing something, they still don't remember it. So, for example, who of you remembers what the first picture was in my talk? You see, we forget things very quickly, so that's why it's important to document. Also for new employees, it's very helpful when they have a place where they can find information. And I think it doesn't have to be the only place that they find information. Of course, it's very important that new employees are also onboarded by the team and that you work with them together. But still, if you have a new employee and someone explains something to him, it is very valuable for him or her, for them, that they can read again about this in the documentation. And then maybe also read it from a different, maybe a slightly different point of view, because if you only hear it once, you don't understand everything. And it's also good that you just have another way of learning about this specific thing. I also frequently encountered that diagrams or also parts of the documentation are not really understandable without any introduction. So usually people have to be almost introduced to things. And I think that it feels like it's almost normal in our industry, but in my opinion, this shouldn't be the norm, because I think I have more than enough experience that the one person that knows something is, for example, on holidays, and it then is almost possible to work on this specific task because you don't know where to start. I mean, do you also know, have you also experienced something similar? Not that many people. Who is too shy to hold up their hand? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, but I think therefore we should try to provide all the necessary information to understand the documentation and diagrams in case someone is not around, or yeah, there are multiple reasons for that. And of course there are always aspects that are subject to change, and some level of detail does not make sense to document. But I am sure that most projects have some basic concepts that have not changed over a long time and they are still not documented. Maybe it's a bit exaggerated, but it kind of reminds me of when people were not able to write and they just told their stories verbally. And I feel like some part of the knowledge in some teams is only like the tales that people told each other in earlier times, which is romantic until someone goes on vacation. So I think, moreover, it's also important to document reasons for a specific decision, especially when you do something that is not according to the standards. Because if it is not documented, the risk is high that someone will change it, and then issues happen because it was a different way because of a specific reason. Or it could also be that maybe someone tries for a very long time to change something because they want to do it the right way, how they have learned it. But actually already like 6 months ago, someone tried exactly the same thing, lost a lot of time, and actually they already found it does not work, but because it was not documented, the other person also loses the time trying the same. So I think it's important just to write this down. And yeah, for example, there are decision logs, but you can also write it down differently. I think it's just important that it is somewhere so that people do not change something accidentally that they should not change. I think I was only able to scratch the surface on documentation. There are entire talks about documentation, so you can also dive deeper there if you are interested. So coming back to the topic of complexity, there are also some domain complexity that cannot be simplified more. So for example, if you have a very complex financial calculation, this cannot just simply change. But you still could try to make the code better. So I think in this particular case, it would make sense that the developer and the person from business work together to find out like what are intermediate steps, so you can really try to break it down into a more understandable process, so it also leads to cleaner code and hopefully less bugs. So all in all, complex logic is unavoidable, but when broken into understandable parts, with business inputs, it becomes safer and easier to maintain. In this talk, I talked a lot about communication and that the business side can like influence the code quality. But I just want to make sure that we should not forget the developer responsibility in the code quality. So it's still important to use tools like a static code analysis, code reviews, and sticking to guidelines and so on. So I am coming to my conclusion. When we talk about code quality, we only talk about it like it lives in the IDE, but I think in reality, it starts in conversations long before the first line of code is written. I think everyone has a role to play in it. This is like a shared responsibilities, and it is important to continuously work on improving the communication. And I think one good place to start is just to try to recognize when you make assumptions about the knowledge of others. And if you are not already doing it, if you are explaining something or trying to understand something, like make a quick sketch just to better understand the concept. I think these tips can be used by developers, but also by business analysts, or I think maybe also for everyone. And yeah, I think there is no perfect solution, but we can try to incorporate ways to improve the current situation. So I thank you for your attention. If you scan the code, you should get the slides. And I'm also now open for questions. And also, if we don't have enough time for questions, if you see me the next few days, just feel free to approach me if you have any question or just want to chat. Yeah, but yeah, I'm open for questions. I will put. Okay. So I think the highest voters is how much impact is introduced by OT when active. But what is OT? Oh, okay. Yeah, then I won't answer this question. Oh, another question about OT. Are there actually questions for me? I only say other questions. The last two, okay. Okay. How can we ensure new developers can find the documentation they need? I think what I really liked when I onboarded that usually they had like a Confluence page where they, I don't know, titled it like introduction or onboarding or whatever. Sometimes I even had like a page that was intended to be copied, and it was then a page for me, and they had just where I could check off what I already have done. That also has a lot of links. Yeah, I think in general also, I think in one of Jackie Reed's talks, she also mentioned that it makes sense to have like an entry point, because I think a lot of people experience Confluence isn't the best for finding information. Yeah, I already see people shaking their heads. So, yeah, in general, it really helps to have like an entry point. And I also, what I often do is when I see a page, a Confluence page, and I know it could be good for me later, I usually bookmark it and save it on the Confluence on the favorites, just to make sure that I hopefully find it again, because usually if you don't remember the exact title, it's sometimes difficult to find. But yeah, sure. So the short answer is have an entry page where the important pages are available. Maybe also try to clean up if you have things that are no longer necessary. and yeah, maybe bookmark and like start pages you will find important. So, how did the business analyst discover the rounded rules? Reading the code, I guess. So that's interesting. I actually asked him, and I think he never understood my question, which is it's very ironic because I talked about communication. So I think it was a mix of a lot of things, because usually business analysts do not read code, I think. But he is a bit special. Well, in this regard, he also reads some parts of the code, and I think he learns a bit of coding just because it interests him, but it's not that he is a developer. But I think it is a combination of just thinking through different cases, looking at what already exists, and so it was, I think, a combination of so many things. I don't even know if he knows. I could imagine that it is a combination of everything, because because when he works, he writes down everything in so detail. It's sometimes crazy when we get a task from him, and then it's like, first you read like a conference page where he already has written some pseudocode and so on. So I think he just thought through so many different things. So I guess that is how he found out through. But I cannot say if it was more code or diagrams or so on. So yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So first, I tried to summarize the question, also for the recording. So the question was actually if we consider the DDD, domain-driven development, um, especially because sometimes like the business cannot really check if the developers understood it correctly. Yeah. Um, because there are like two aspects, I think. It's what you meant, like the two different points of view, and it's difficult to bring them together. I think it's what you were going for, right? Mm. So, I mean, in this project, I didn't really have the possibility now to like think about that. Like changing it, I think this would probably be difficult just because, yeah, it would be a lot of effort. But I think it would certainly make sense to do it. But yeah, it's not something that is probably feasible because of like systemic issues, and we would need more time. So I think you also had the. Oh. Yeah, so actually, unfortunately, I think I haven't like experienced a lot of decision logs that were used, so I cannot really recommend any. Um, I think sometimes it's also only already helpful if directly in the code you write the comment and just write why it is like this, because sometimes you see it in the code and you think, why did they do it like this, and you just change it, but it is purposefully breaking some pattern or something. So I think sometimes this is even the better way, because you maybe don't look wherever. So yeah, but I think the time is up. But as I said, if you see me at the conference and want to talk, just approach me. And thanks for coming.